Chapter 199. The Crusader. 2. The commander of the Knights of the Blood Cross, sworn to the Uruz Empire, the Crusader Rafael Martinez. Eugene had also heard several stories about the man. His name was one of the ones that cropped up whenever it came to discussing the continent's strongest warriors. The council head of the Black Lion Castle. The commander of the White Dragon Knights. Shimuan's 12 finest. The king of Northern Roar. And the commander of the Knights of the Blood Cross. Eugene watched as the man walked towards them from the other side of the forest. The years that this man had seen surpassed those seen by Carmen or Alcester and were comparable to the hundreds of years lived by the now-deceased Doyne's Lionheart. However, from his appearance, it was hard to believe that the man who was now approaching them had lived for over 100 years. Raphael looked like he hadn't even reached puberty. Calling him a young man would actually be overstating it, as by all appearances he looked like a boy. A young boy with beautiful blonde hair and blue eyes. However, those large blue eyes didn't carry even the slightest hint of boyish innocence. Instead, the desolate and somber look in his eyes combined with his boyish appearance to create a strange atmosphere. It really is bizarre, Eugene admitted to himself. Although he had heard about this several times, this was Eugene's first time seeing it in person. But possessing an appearance that was different from the actual years lived was nothing special for someone who had reached such a level of strength. It was only natural for a younger body to be stronger than an older body. Therefore, as soon as wizards, knights, and other types of warriors reached the point where they could perfectly control their bodies with mana, they would reconstruct their old bodies into younger bodies. After rejuvenating their bodies, what they did with their looks depended on their taste and status. For example, they might put on a dignified appearance that matched their age, or they might just follow the example of their body and make their face younger as well. If they didn't care about the surrounding opinions or their own position of authority, they might decide to keep a young body and appearance like Carmen did. On the other hand, if they did care about the looks that their station would draw, they might maintain a dignified middle-aged look like Klein, the current council head, or Gilead, the patriarch of the clan. However, Raphael was going too far. Or at least that's what it looked like in Eugene's eyes. Not only did he have a young boy's face, but he also had an immature body to match. Was he about 160 centimeters tall? Eugene guessed that it wasn't that short, but they do say that his growth stopped during his childhood. Compared with other knights, Raphael was especially small-framed. It didn't stand out that much when he was younger. But in his mid-teens, the point at which the body's physical growth accelerated, while the other knights all sprouted up like weeds and strapped muscles onto their frames, Raphael's body hadn't shown any further growth. Even under such adverse conditions, Raphael was still able to rise to the rank of commander of the Knights of the Blood Cross. He should already be able to perfectly control his body with his mana, but Raphael's body remained small. For the past half a century, the Crusader had made a name for himself as the smallest and strongest knight on the continent. Sir Eugene Lionheart? Raphael cautiously called out to Eugene as he approached with a slow gait. Then Raphael stopped where he was, not approaching any further. Instead of replying immediately, Eugene stared at Raphael. He certainly was small. That boyish face combined with the eyes of an old knight who had seen just about everything didn't match even in the slightest, so at first glance, it felt like Raphael was wearing a mask. Raphael wore the uniform of the Knights of the Blood Cross, which had a red cross embroidered on the neck and the chest. He wasn't wearing any armor, but at the same time he wasn't unarmed. Behind Raphael's head stood the hilt of a cross-shaped greatsword that was taller than Raphael's own height. Raphael's eyes traveled down from Eugene's face. Eugene knew what that obvious gaze wanted to see. So he lifted his cloak and showed Raphael the hilt of the holy sword in his hand. "It's fortunate that you're all right," Raphael said with a bow of his head. It was difficult for Eugene to guess what this old man was thinking behind his boyish mask. Especially since, as someone who could sit at the head of the Blood Cross Knights, Raphael should be quite a zealot of the light. And from this incident, Eugene had concluded in his heart that all zealots of the light were incomprehensible existences. "Saint Candidate Christina is still with you, correct?" Raphael asked as his head lifted from his bow. Raphael's perpetually somber gaze was still fixed on the holy sword. Eugene pointed to the tent behind him and said, "She's over there. But what is your reason for looking for us?" "It's not like you're asking because you're unaware," Raphael pointed out. "Of course I know," Eugene admitted. But that's exactly why your attitude seems quite mysterious. After I did such a thing, well, I don't think you'd ever be able to accept the reasons for it from your point of view. So it's strange for you to come here alone under such circumstances, and your demeanor is also strangely calm. Raphael's lips twitched at these words. With a slight smile, he pointed at the holy sword that Eugene was currently resting his hand on. Sir Eugene, you have been recognized by the holy sword. So for you to have done something like this, you must have had a reason that left you with no choice but to do so. And Sir Eugene, since you are still able to rest your hand on the holy sword, that must mean that the God of light who created the holy sword also approves of your action. Or at least I would like to think so, Raphael finished hesitantly. Eugene hummed consideringly. Also, Saint Candidate Christina is still staying by your side, Raphael added. Although I haven't met her too often, I know that the Saint Candidate is a very sincere and kind person. Eugene cocked an eyebrow. Is that so? Yes, Raphael nodded. If you had somehow forcibly kidnapped her, then I believe the Saint Candidate would have taken her own life. Eugene really didn't enjoy hearing such words. With a twisted smile, Eugene wrapped his fingers around the hilt of the holy sword and said, I really hate hearing things like that. The same goes for me, Raphael said with a nod and a returned smile. However, as someone who has been raised by Cardinal Rogerus, from what I know and have seen, the Saint Candidate is just such a person. So for that Saint Candidate, to have abandoned the sacred ceremony midway and sought refuge with you, Sir Eugene, it's still hard for me to believe it. Did you see the temple before you came here? Eugene asked. Raphael nodded. It's in quite a miserable state. Eugene had expected the question to leave a crack in Raphael's expression, but it seemed to have failed. I just realized that I should have checked something. Though in fact I wonder if it is something that I really need to confirm. Was everything done by you, Sir Eugene? Raphael belatedly inquired. I did kill over 100 paladins and inquisitors as well as the Punisher Atarax, and there was also, who was it again? Eugene trailed off uncertainly. If you're talking about the captain of the Knights of the Blood Cross, that friend's name was Giovanni, Raphael answered. Ah yes, Lord. Giovanni as well as Cardinal Rogerus. I killed them all, Eugene confessed honestly. Throughout this whole conversation Raphael's expression hadn't changed. He had maintained the same smile that he had had from the start, and his calm eyes seemed to be treating all of this like an extremely formal and business-as-usual report. You really did something amazing, Raphael commented. Yes, well, things just turned out like that, Eugene replied. Then the two stood there as a brief silence spread between them. Was this really how the conversation was meant to play out? Eugene asked this question deep inside his heart. Wasn't Raphael's reaction way too casual? Even though, as a paladin who served as a symbol of his nation, his loyalty to the Empire and the Church, and also his faith in the light, must all be strong. Raphael's expression seemed to truly be calm. However, Eugene still didn't let his guard down. From what he had experienced in his previous life, the more he couldn't understand what someone was thinking, and the more bizarre their attitude, the more absurd the madness that person concealed. Raphael perked up. Saint Candidate Christina. Christina, who had been waiting inside the tent, suddenly emerged. Although he was still standing quite a distance from the tent, Raphael spotted Christina emerging and greeted her with a smile and wave of his hand. I'm glad to see that you're unscathed. Eugene snorted. Didn't you say that she's someone you haven't met with that often? I was telling the truth, but that doesn't mean I'm indifferent to her. I'm also the one who taught her how to use the flail that she wields, Raphael explained. Christina began to approach. Eugene tried to keep her from getting closer by raising his hand to stop her, but Raphael held his hand up even faster than Eugene. Saint Candidate, Raphael called out. Please don't get closer just yet. Christina hesitated. Lord Raphael. I still haven't decided what exactly I should do about all this, Raphael informed her. Eugene smirked at these words. Looking down at Raphael, who was shorter than him, Eugene asked, What else do you have to consider? Raphael refused to ask any further questions. I don't think we need to say anything more about the matter that just occurred. I don't really want to do something like that, and I don't think it would be good for you either, Sir Eugene. Why do you not want to ask about it? Eugene asked curiously. Well, it's because I took a look at the temple before coming here. Cardinal Rogerus was strong, and friend Giovanni was a captain in our knightly order, so his skills were unquestionably good. Atarax from the Malfakarum also wasn't an opponent to be taken lightly. There were also about 170 paladins and inquisitors who died there, Raphael said with a shake of his head. For such a tragedy to take place within a single day, Sir Eugene, you must be incredibly strong. That's why I can honestly say I really don't want to fight with you, Sir Eugene. Eugene raised an eyebrow. Then we just don't need to fight, right? If that were the case, I wouldn't have even been sent here. You must also be aware of how absurd what you have just said is. So it really has to be this way? Yes, Sir Eugene, you have truly done something incredible. If I were to set aside how much I don't want to fight with you, look at all the facts of the matter and seriously think about the situation, then I have to conclude that I must fight with and kill you no matter what. But it would have been easier to do so if you brought a few other paladins with you instead of coming here all by yourself, Eugene pointed out. It couldn't be helped, Raphael shrugged. The temple and the fount of light located here are meant to be kept secret even within the church, and I only came here to find out what exactly had taken place. So that's the case, Eugene nodded in understanding. Raphael sighed. Honestly speaking, this goes beyond what I could even imagine. I examined the corpses of those that you killed and what I found was truly impressive. Such ruthless swordplay is hard to see in an era like this one. Silence fell once more. Raphael eventually broke the silence. It was the Holy Father who sent me here. After confirming what happened here at the fount, he ordered me to completely subdue you and bring you to the Vatican, or else, behead you and bring your head to them. Eugene hesitated. That's... Lord Raphael, in your opinion, do you really think that will be possible? Although I'll have to try to know for sure, among all the knights under the command of the Holy Father, there is no knight as strong, faithful, trustworthy and loyal as I am, Raphael declared without any apparent arrogance. As such, I had no choice but to come here. So what are you going to do now? Are you going to draw that great sword of yours? Eugene asked challengingly. I'm still in the middle of thinking about that, but... Sir Eugene, what if you run away instead? Raphael proposed. Eugene frowned. I'm just saying this because I think it will be easier for me to muster up some motivation for it, but if at all possible, what if you leave the saint candidate here and run away on your own? Raphael explained. Are you being serious right now? Eugene asked in disbelief. I'm only saying this after having given it a lot of thought, Raphael nodded. I don't want a sword fight to break out where the saint candidate can see it. And after seeing you stand there so imposingly, my faith has also been shaken slightly. Really now, Eugene said doubtfully. Raphael gasped. I forgot to tell you something? Before we turn our swords against each other, may I ask you for a favor? What kind of favor? Although there wasn't any anger, hostility, or murderous intent present in their conversation, Eugene could still detect the strange scent of drawn steel. It felt like he was talking to a sword with a mouth. The same was true of Eugene, but Raphael was someone who didn't need anything like a warm-up routine before springing into a fight. As a paladin who was wearing the skin of a young boy, once he had made up his mind to do so, Raphael could immediately unleash an insanity-inducing murderous intent. If needed, Raphael could muster up anger and hatred for the deaths of the paladins, the cardinals and the members of the Inquisition. He would then hone all the emotions generated by this into his murderous intent and would infuse this intent into his greatsword. It seemed that Raphael was someone who thought that solving his problems with fighting and killing was unnecessarily messy. From what he had shown through his words, gaze and attitude so far, he wielded his sword in a highly businesslike manner. Please draw the holy sword, Raphael finally spoke up. And call on the light of the holy sword in front of me. Christina exclaimed. Lord Raphael. Sir Eugene really is. Pardon me for saying this, Saint Candidate Christina, but I'm afraid I cannot listen to your words. Currently what I need is to confirm the facts so that I can make my judgment, Raphael said as he took a few steps back. After staring into Raphael's perpetually clouded eyes, Eugene nodded slowly. This wasn't the first time he'd received a request to pull out the holy sword and show off its light. Whenever Eugene pulled out the holy sword and drew upon its light, all the believers of the light who saw it celebrated the fact that Eugene was the hero. But even under such circumstances, upon learning that Eugene's opinions contradicted their own points of view, they changed their evaluation of Eugene as quickly as a flip of the palm. Is this enough? Eugene asked as the blade of the holy sword was drawn fully from within his cloak and began to radiate light. Causing light to shine from the holy sword wasn't of any difficulty to Eugene. He just needed to hold the holy sword and focus on his desire for light. Eugene himself had many questions about this light. When Eugene was killing the faithful within the temple, the holy sword didn't emit light as Eugene had desired, but it hadn't burned his hands to try and escape Eugene's grasp either. Instead, it had actually guided Eugene into finding the right path through the temple's fog, and at the very last moment when he had slain Cardinal Rogerus, it had burst into a brilliant light even though Eugene hadn't called for it to do so. It was as if it was trying to prove that this really was divine retribution as Eugene had claimed. Even under such circumstances, the light had also lent its strength to all of the temple's clergy. In the end, Sergio had summoned angels using high-level divine magic and even made use of his stigma. In Eugene's hands, the holy sword seemed to show that the god of light despised this attempt to imitate his incarnation and the ceremony that was meant to complete Christina's transformation into this false saint, thus delivering divine retribution. But at the same time, God had lent his light to his other believers. Anise had said that the God of light loves all his followers and bestows his light on every one of them. It would have been better if the God of light had responded to Eugene's will and had withdrawn his light from the priests that Eugene was facing. Then, given his position as the hero, Eugene would have been able to act without any restraint. However, the God of light hadn't done that. The God of light seemed more indifferent than benevolent. He had allowed the corpse of his incarnation to be used to create an imitation of his incarnation in the form of a saint, and he had silently bestowed his light to be used in the inhumane experiments that Eurus had been conducting for hundreds of years to perfect their imitation incarnation. This had gone on for hundreds of years. While it was true that Eugene was the hero acknowledged by the Holy Sword, the zealots of Eurus, especially the Pope and the cardinals who had known what was going on behind the scenes and had lied that the stigmata they had carved on themselves were bestowed by the light, might not show any regret or repentance, even if Eugene were to reveal the truth of this tragedy. The fact that Rafael Martinez had come here on his own today also allowed Eugene to guess what they were thinking. The Pope and the cardinals intended to completely bury this matter. Raphael silently stared at the shining holy sword for a few moments. Then he raised his hand and grasped the hilt behind his head. It was impossible to pull out a great sword strapped onto his back over his head in one motion, so Raphael pulled the hilt of the great sword towards his shoulder. The belt wrapped around his chest was moved along with this motion, so the great sword was now slung over his shoulder. Flying. The cross-shaped great sword slowly slid out of its scabbard. Raphael held the hilt of the drawn great sword in both hands. Without turning off the light emitted by the holy sword, Eugene just stared at Raphael. Whoosh! A light flared out from Raphael's great sword. This light that was summoned so casually was incomparably more brilliant and deeper than the light summoned by the paladins that Eugene had seen a few days ago. Raphael silently compared the two different lights. The light was reflected in Raphael's deeply shadowed eyes. Without any trace of amusement, he looked at his own great sword, then nodded slightly. The great sword spun in a circle. Then, resting the great sword down beside him and holding it up in support, he knelt down on the spot. "Respect the hero," Raphael said as he bowed his head. Eugene still couldn't figure out what Raphael's intentions were. Raphael then raised the great sword up into the air above his head using both hands and said, "And worship the light." Raphael raised his head. Through the brilliant light coming from their swords, Raphael looked up at Eugene, then lowered the great sword he had raised above his head onto the ground in front of his knees. "What are you doing?" Eugene finally asked. "The holy sword has recognized you. Even though you have killed many believers of the faith, its light hasn't faded and even now, it shines so brilliantly," Raphael said by way of explanation as he lowered his head once more. "Since the light remains so bright even when held in your hands, Sir Eugene, what you did wasn't a massacre of the faithful, but instead a divine retribution delivered from the light." "Do you really think so?" Eugene asked skeptically. "As a simple believer, I don't feel any need to separate the facts from the truth. I just need to follow the will of the brilliant light," Raphael stated calmly. Eugene raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you suspicious that I've fallen?" "If a fallen one's hand was still able to emit such a light, then they were only right to fall," Raphael said with a shrug and a laugh. "I've followed the light for a long time and have always loyally served the faith. During that time I have seen so many things that have nearly shaken my faith. What I found here was a secret temple, traces of a ritual that was no different from abuse, the lost remains of our deceased former saints, and evidence of a secret collaboration between the Pope and the cardinals. Eugene remained silent. But the light has still generously bestowed upon them a light that is more brilliant than most others. And even as I am in pain and doubt, having lost trust in my faith because of all that I've just seen, God has still granted his light to me. As such, I eventually decided that this side must be the right one. But Sir Eugene, having seen your light, it's clear that this side isn't in the right, Raphael declared firmly as he rose to his feet. So let us go and behead the Pope. Huh? Eugene gasped. Pope Aerius is awaiting my return in the audience chamber of the Vatican, Raphael revealed. Cardinal Bashara and Cardinal Pietro should also be with Aerius. Eugene was struck dumb once more. Since the three are together, we can take all their heads at once. There are quite a few paladins assigned to the Vatican, but if I lead the way, it should be easy for us to reach the audience chamber, Raphael plotted. Hold on, Eugene demanded. Caught up in his plans, Raphael continued uninterrupted. There are escort knights directly accompanying Aerius, but they are only 10 in total, and their skills are similar to Giovanni, whom you have killed. Hold on a second, Eugene attempted once more. I think the real problem will be with Aerius, Bashara and Pietro. Sir Eugene, you said you killed Sergio, but was he able to use the light? Raphael inquired. Eugene replied. He was, but... Indeed, the merciful light illuminates all those who possess faith. Thanks to that, we'll have a tough time killing the Pope and the cardinals. As if it was only natural, Raphael had counted himself alongside Eugene and Christina, tying them together in his plans as we. So I, of course, recommend a surprise attack, but that will require your help, Sir Eugene. First of all, you pretend to have been subdued by me so that we can enter the audience chamber together. Then we should be able to kill the cardinals by surprise. But that still leaves us with Aerius. The problem is, as long as we're unable to kill Aerius in one blow, all the paladins, inquisitors and priests will be called, so even if we do succeed in killing him... Just hold on a moment. Eugene hurriedly shouted to cut off Raphael's words. I have no intention of killing them. But don't they deserve to be killed? Raphael questioned in confusion. And they're also planning on killing you, Sir Eugene. Really? Eugene asked. In my opinion, that's probably what they're after. From what I've heard, most of the sacred relics stored in the special reliquary have disappeared somewhere, Raphael informed them. Huh? Eugene reacted in surprise at this news. Raphael nodded. While I don't know the exact reason for their disappearance, it probably has something to do with you, right? Eugene recalled what he had seen of the fount of light and the relics that had acted as filters and water purifiers within the temple's mechanisms. All of those had turned into light and disappeared in front of Eugene's eyes. Did he just say that the holy relics in the Vatican have disappeared as well? Eugene considered the news with a frown. In the end, most of those relics were the remains of former saints. Most of the special class relics that have been in storage since the founding of Eurus have been lost. And the Fount of Light, which was considered a sacred location, has also disappeared. Cardinal Rogerus has died, and droves of paladins and inquisitors have also been killed. So isn't it only natural for the Pope and the other cardinals to try to kill you or find you accountable for this, Sir Eugene? Raphael warned. But in the end, aren't they also priests? Won't they convert like you did upon seeing the light of the Holy Sword? Eugene asked hopefully. I wasn't converted. I was rescued from my disillusionment, Raphael said with a calm smile. Since I was disillusioned in the first place, I just needed a trigger to set me on a different path. But the Pope and the cardinals are different from me. To them, as the hero who suddenly appeared out of nowhere, Sir Eugene, you are just a whim of the light. They might worship you as a miracle, but if they had to, they wouldn't hesitate to call you a fallen one or a devil. Just like Sergio had done. Sir Eugene, the best you can hope for is their acceptance, not their conversion. Those three have been in too high a position, seen too many things, and have firmed their resolve for too many difficult decisions to be so easily swayed. They will demand you to do something to balance out all the things they have lost because of you, and according to my judgment, it will be impossible to fulfill such a request, so it would be better to kill them, Raphael advised. What do you think they will ask me to do? Eugene checked. They might ask you to assassinate one of Hemletha's 3 princes to prove that you're the hero. On second thought, that might be too much of a provocation toward the Demon King of Incarceration. Complete naturalization into a citizen of Eurus would be far too light. I've thought of a request with just the right amount of impact. Pope Aurius will probably ask you to assassinate the King of Roer, Raphael declared loudly. Huh? Eugene gaped in disbelief. The King of Roer, the bestial King Amun-Roer. Their country has repeatedly refused to join the anti-demon alliance led by the Holy Empire, and since a few years ago, it has started interacting with Helmuth. King Amun's personal strength is worthy of being counted as one of the best in the entire continent, so you could call his continued existence a thorn in the Pope's eye, Raphael explained. But why would they ask me to do that? Eugene demanded. Raphael continued to extrapolate. No matter how irritating he is, the Pope can't make a move himself, and Eurus won't gain anything from waging war against Roer. That's why they would try to use you, Sir Eugene. They would probably place a seal in your brain in case you fail. That way, even if the attempt did fail, the connection to Eurus wouldn't be revealed, and Kiel or the Lionheart clan would be forced to take the blame. Eugene huffed in belief. Raphael thought of another idea. Or perhaps they might chop off your limbs and make them into relics. If that's the case, then let's discuss how to convince them without me having to accept one of their requests. Eugene forcefully changed the subject. That seems like it would be impossible, Raphael muttered with a grave expression. Eugene ignored these words and turned his head. Christina was still standing at a distance. Eugene called out to her, "Christina, come here." Christina reacted in confusion. Don't just walk over here, do that, Eugene instructed her. What did he mean by that? Christina was taken aback for a moment, but she soon understood what Eugene was asking her to do. With a low cough, she placed her hands together in front of her chest. When Christina next took a step, Fwoosh! 8 wings snapped open from behind her back. Won't they be convinced once they see that? Eugene turned to ask Raphael as he pointed to Christina, who was still approaching with her wings spread wide. Raphael's stoic mask had shattered. His mouth was wide open in an expression of pure admiration and excitement that finally suited his boyish face. Chapter 200. The Audience Chamber, 1. If a country had enough national strength to be called a great power, not only would there be a difference in the quality of the troops fielded, but it would also have at least one type of air corps. The Kiel Empire had its Griffin Corps, and the Black Lions of the Lionheart clan each had their own wyvern to carry them. Similarly, the Roer Kingdom had trained their own subspecies of wyverns and had formed the Ice Wyvern Corps. Among the various different air corps there were 2 unique ones. The first was the Magic Kingdom of Aratha's Magic Corps, which preferred to fly by relying on summoned beasts and their familiars instead of breeding a separate race of flying monsters. The second was found in the Desert Kingdom of Nahama, where their Sphinx, a large breed of flying monster, was operated more as an aerial battleship. Among all the monsters used in Air Corps, the most classic choice was the winged horse known as the Pegasus. There were 2 places that bred the Pegasi and integrated them into their Air Corps: the Sea Kingdom of Shimuan and the Holy Empire of Eurus. The commander of the Blood Cross Knights, Rafael Martinez, didn't just have his massive greatsword in the shape of a cross as his only famous symbol. Even in this huge holy empire, there was said to exist only one divine horse. The horse of the sun, Apollo, that was said to have been bestowed by the light. "It's all propaganda," Raphael said dismissively as he gestured towards Apollo. Apollo was a gigantic horse with a golden mane whose sheer size lived up to the claim of being a divine horse. In terms of its body alone, Apollo looked to be more than twice the size of a regular warhorse, but once the platinum-colored horse armor was donned, the already gigantic size of its body swelled even further. On top of that, unlike an ordinary Pegasus, Apollo had 2 pairs of wings. "It's amazingly large," Eugene commented. Approaching with a loud clopping of his hooves, Apollo spread his 4 wings wide. From his appearance, the sleek image that came to mind when one thought of a Pegasus couldn't be seen at all. Quite a few mid-sized monsters like ogres and trolls would be forced to hunch their shoulders in fear in front of Apollo. It's only natural for him to be so big. The Vatican propagates the lie that Apollo is a Pegasus that was bestowed upon the world by the light. But this guy is actually a holy hybrid made by a mix of crossbreeding, biological magic and holy magic, Raphael revealed. "Holy what?" A holy hybrid, Raphael repeated. It's not just Apollo. All of the Pegasi belonging to Ura's holy steed cavalry corps are holy hybrids. Though it's true that Apollo is the most exceptional example among all of them. Having drawn close, Apollo butted its head against Raphael while letting out a whinny. Raphael blinked his shadowed eyes and stroked Apollo's head. But such news shouldn't come as a surprise to you, Sir Eugene. Isn't that why you broke the fountain and meted out divine punishment? Raphael asked rhetorically. Eugene returned the question, How much do you know about it, Lord Raphael? I don't really know much, Raphael admitted. Because I didn't want to know. The ugly truths of the Church of Light, which has reigned as the orthodox religion for hundreds of years, well, those aren't things that I really concern myself with. What is important to me is that no matter how ugly the church may be, the light still exists. That's all I need. Before getting on Apollo's back, Raphael first got down on one knee and bowed his head to Christina. Christina hesitated for a moment before stepping onto Raphael's knee. Raphael then carefully supported Christina's back and stood up, lifting her up into the saddle. Now for you, Sir Eugene, Raphael turned to him. I don't need it, Eugene quickly refused. In fact, Christina didn't truly need such consideration either. Although it might be difficult for Raphael, who had stopped growing during his childhood, to accept this, but Eugene and Christina were actually taller than Raphael. In that case, allow me to take a seat at the front, Raphael readily agreed. Apollo's back was as broad as he was large, and his saddle was equally spacious. Even with the three of them riding him, they could sit comfortably together on the saddle, and Apollo's legs showed no signs of shaking. Raphael took his seat at the front of the saddle and picked up the reins. Although we've already discussed this, once we begin our descent towards the Vatican, please pretend to faint, Sir Eugene, Raphael reminded him. As a master of your level, Sir Eugene, I'm sure you will also perform excellently while pretending to be unconscious. Wouldn't it be better for me to pretend to be dead rather than just unconscious? Eugene asked. The important thing was to avoid being noticed by the paladins charged with protecting the Holy See. Things would get very cumbersome if they got caught right at the start of their mission. Eugene also understood this fact and was quite confident in his ability to pretend to be dead. When he had first become a mercenary, he used to bury his body in the gap between corpses and hide his breath and presence in order to survive on the toughest battlefields. How long will it take us to get there? I don't know exactly where this is, but it seems to be quite far away from Trescia Cathedral, Eugene guessed. If you were to ride an ordinary horse or carriage, it would probably take a day just to get to the Trescia train station from this forest. Then it would take about 6 hours to take a train from Trescia to the capital of Eurasia. But with Apollo's speed, we can reach the cathedral in 4 or 5 hours at the very latest. Raphael paused for a moment and turned to look at Eugene. Although if you hadn't destroyed the warp gate, it would have been much faster and easier to get to the Vatican, Sir Eugene. Eugene argued. But thanks to me destroying it, weren't we fortunate enough to have you come out to meet us after 3 days had passed? Raphael easily agreed. Yes, that's true. If the warp gate had been left standing, it might have been someone else other than me who was sent here. So in the end, that means it was fortunate that I was being cautious. Yes, it was very well done. Eugene changed the subject. By the way, Lord Raphael, are you really okay with this? Since I don't see any other methods to solve our situation, I feel like it can't be helped that we're doing this, but you should have many other choices available to you, and you've got a lot to lose by offending the Holy Land, haven't you? When this question was tossed at him, Raphael just shrugged his shoulders and said, When I look at the options available to me, it seems that the only other option apart from assisting you is to somehow either drag you and the Saint Candidate to the Vatican by force or just kill you. Sir Eugene, as you have said, it's true that I have a lot to lose. But if I can only protect what I have by doing something that I would hate to do, then I would rather lose it all. Oh, Eugene murmured. Also, as a follower of the light, there is something that I want to confirm. While facing the hero and the saint candidate who has been blessed with 4 pairs of wings, whether or not the Pope and the cardinals refuse to bow their heads and continue to insist that their own faith is unquestionably in the right and superior. The corners of Raphael's mouth twitched as he said. It was only for an instant, but Eugene saw the killing intent of a viper poised to strike behind that boyish face. Raphael continued, If they do, that would be blasphemy and it must be punished. I possess a body that has seen me revered as the most exceptional paladin in the Church's services. I pride myself on being the sharpest blade of the light in this era. In front of me, should I catch them in the act of undeniably blaspheming the light, how could I just leave them be? Apollo spread his wings. Then a soft light enveloped Apollo and the horse rapidly soared into the sky. Eugene kept a hand on Akasha as it was stored within his cloak and looked at Apollo's wings. Eugene understood why Raphael had called the horse a holy hybrid. Apollo's wings had several spells inscribed on them, like an artifact enchanted with magic. This made the wings look more like the examples of magitech seen in golems or artifacts that had been implanted into the torso rather than natural body parts sprouting from the horse's body. How terrible, Mare muttered. Such experiments were also conducted in Aratha's towers of magic. But at least they didn't propagandize the results of such an experiment, calling it a grace of the light or evidence of a miracle like Ura's did. Christina silently stared at Apollo's wings with a distressed look. She had also met Apollo once when she was younger. As a young girl, in the face of a divine horse with 4 wings, Christina had been thrilled by the sight of the light emanating from Apollo, and it had further convinced her of the existence of her god. It had also acted as a source of comfort for her. She had told herself that since the light definitely existed, being chosen as the saint of this era was a blessed honor. However, the current Christina had learned the entire truth. Although the process of its creation and the purpose of its existence were different between Apollo, who had been made as a piece of propaganda for the light, and herself, the saint candidate who was an imitation incarnation, in the end they weren't fundamentally all that different, were they? Christina examined the feathers that made up Apollo's outstretched wings. Each of the feathers seemed to have been spun out of sunlight, but the light of the feathers was actually artificially created. Even Christina, with her shallow knowledge of magic, could tell that much. She just needed to look at what was happening now. Apollo's flight was going fast enough that the scenery on the ground below was zipping by, but no wind was blowing at them from the front. And even though they were flying so fast, their bodies sitting in the saddle weren't shaking at all. Stop thinking such useless thoughts and hug the waist in front of you. Huh. A reproachful voice suddenly rang out inside Christina's head. Anissa's voice chided, Christina Rogerus. Just how many times have I chastised you about this during your prayers in these past few days? While it is true that you've suffered a miserable existence, it's also just as true that your very existence is miraculous. Yes, Christina meekly conceded. Also, you are actually very lucky. The hand that you've been dealt could even be considered fortunate enough to be another miracle. You won't have to spend dozens of years wandering through gruesome battlefields during that terrible era like I did. You also don't have to feel any worry or doubt about God's existence. Since you and I who dwell within you are proof of the existence of God. Christina couldn't deny the words of the voice in her head. While Christina was also quite confident in her rhetorical skills, the great saint from 300 years ago was extremely good at cornering Christina without leaving any room for resistance. No matter what, you've found your own salvation. From now on, you won't need to go through any more of those agonizing rituals, and you don't need to feel the pain of the stigmata like I did. Because most of the pain you should feel will be borne by me. I'm not sure I'm all right with that, Lady Anise. Even if you're not all right with it, I'll continue to do so, and all you need to do in return is make sure to have a few drinks. Also, Christina, haven't I told you to call me sister? 1. How could I dare to? Or else would you rather call me Big Sis? 2. Although I think it's funny that we're even arguing over the difference between sister and Big Sis. Wouldn't it be fine to call you Lady Anise? I don't want that. You and I are spiritual alter egos. Although there is a time difference of 300 years between us, we can still be called sisters because of that. I want to cherish this bond with you, so if you're not willing to at least call me sister, then I'll feel so sad and disappointed that I won't be able to hold back my tears. Christina silently ruminated. This also counts as one of the regrets I couldn't fulfill during my lifetime. Even though I was older than Sienna, that arrogant Sienna never once called me Big Sis. When I tried to get her to do so, she would just ignore me and look at me all funny, then she and Hamel would cooperate to steal my precious holy water and drink it themselves. They really did that? Christina asked in disbelief. Yes. As such, I feel a lingering regret at never being called Big Sis. But since you're too shy and hesitant to call me Big Sis, I'll compromise and allow you to call me sister. Now then, Christina Rogerus, how could there be any problem with that? Isn't it only natural for the title of sister to be used between nuns? All right, Sister Anise, Christina finally conceded. You don't need to add my name to that. Christina hesitated. Yes, sister. But it might be because of my inexperience. I don't think I really understood your first instruction. Could you please repeat it, sister? Christina. I'm not sure who in the world you take after, but you really do have a cunning side to you. You're obviously pretending that you didn't hear it properly, but you just want me to give you a push on the back, don't you? What a shameless woman. And not at all, Christina stammered. I really didn't hear you properly. If that's the case, then listen closely. Christina, do you know what I regretted most before I died? In the face of this sudden question, Christina didn't respond immediately, instead pondering it for a few moments. Considering the regrets left by the faithful Anise. In fact, there wasn't really any need to consider the question. After taking a deep breath, Christina silently replied with a confident look. It's that you weren't able to kill the demon king of incarceration and the demon king of destruction. Nope. Christina faltered in the face of this blunt denial. In that case, when you and Hamel, no, with Sir Eugene and the others. But could it be that you weren't able to save the world? I know. The thing I most regretted was that I couldn't enjoy life. Christina's thoughts froze at this firm reply. Listen closely, Christina Rogers. We both have been unhappy from the moment that we came into existence. Do you agree with that? Weiss, Christina hesitantly acknowledged. After our misfortune, we both finally got a chance to be happy. Because we were born like this and have suffered all sorts of hardships, we deserve to be happier than anyone else in the world. Especially me. I wandered around in that horrible devildom for more than 10 years and did my best to save countless people even while suffering from the pain of the stigmata almost daily. Christina tried to console her. Sister, your tale is a shining example for all priests of the light. So what if it was? Even though I did my best to save countless people, I still couldn't save my own life. How do you think I lived during the peace that the demon king of incarceration so mercifully granted us? After returning from the devildom, it took about 70 years for me to die. During that time, I couldn't enjoy the peace granted by the demon king's pity or find my own satisfaction in life. Christina listened silently. To somehow prepare for the distant future, I shut myself up in a monastery in the countryside and taught a bunch of spoiled brats. It was practically my only pleasure to listen to the popes and cardinals who came by from time to beg for some blood. During all this, I made sure to keep praying and nurturing the future generation while trying to make myself a perfect incarnation of the light. But even that failed. I couldn't become the perfect incarnation of the light during my lifetime. Although I tried to hide my body to flip off the church, I couldn't even do that because of that damned Hamel. Was that really Hamel's fault? Christina couldn't be sure of the answer to that question, so she just kept her mouth shut without making any sort of reply. In the end, my life as a saint was full of regret and failure. However, the merciful light didn't forcefully lead my soul upwards but instead took me in as an angel. That is how I could remain in this world and now dwell within you. Ah, yes, that was truly fortunate. Yep, that's right. It truly is fortunate. But what do you think you're doing? Even though you've been bestowed with so many blessings, you are still sympathizing with the plight of that fool and substituting yourself in its place. Why should I, who lived so miserably, be forced to deal with such feelings of sadness that don't even belong to me? Tigats. Listen carefully, Christina Rogers. We may have been unhappy, but we deserve to be happy. In the end, the so-called saint is nothing more than an illusion, so whether or not our flesh is pure has no effect on the power of our miracles. That's ridiculous. How did you discover such a fact, sister? Could it be? Don't get the wrong idea. I lived my whole life as a saint should. However, after dying like that and becoming an angel, I just realized that the body is of little importance or significance when it comes to things like the light and performing miracles. But that's... Why spout such drivel at this point? Christina, didn't you molest Hamels but thoroughly because of your furtive lust? Christina tried to drown out the voice. Sister, it wasn't like that. It was just all part of taking care of Sir Eugene while he was wounded. Yes, I get it. No matter how furtive you are, once again I guess I can overlook it. But Christina, with how unstable your current posture is, being trapped inside of you, I'm even more anxious than you are. Christina smoothed out her expression as she checked her posture. She was sitting in the very back of Apollo's saddle, holding on tightly to the horse's torso with her legs. Then she reached down with both hands to hold on to the saddle. It wasn't even that precarious. There would be no problems for her to continue sitting by herself. The miracles that had been imbued into Apollo completely prevented any chance of his riders falling. Not only that, Christina was able to summon Anissa's wings, so all she would have to do if she fell was spread those wings and fly. Nope. My wings are just for show. It's impossible to actually fly with them. Huh. Is that really the important thing right now? Christina, hurry up and hold on to Hamel's waist. There's no real need to. If you say that you don't want to, then I will have to forcefully try and move your body to do so. Do you know what that means? It means that I will be taking away your initiative so you won't be able to do anything but watch what happens from the inside. Sister. I'll do things beyond your wildest imaginations. For a furtive person like you, wouldn't that actually work out better? So just think of it as something that can't be helped and enjoy the view from the inside. Christina stopped listening to Anissa's words and lifted her hands from the saddle. Then she hesitated for a few moments before placing her hands on Eugene's waist. Her hands tightened on his sturdy sides that didn't have a trace of fat. Ahem. Christina coughed in self-inflicted embarrassment. She had expected Eugene to turn his head and say something suspicious to her, but Eugene didn't show that type of reaction. Instead, Eugene asked, "Just what have you been pondering for so long?" Christina coughed once before answering, I was just meditating and praying for a while. Since Raphael was sitting in front of them, Christina felt she couldn't talk about Anise. While relieved that Eugene didn't seem to suspect her of anything, Christina carefully stretched her arms even further. After continuing like that, the moment that she finally tried to lean her body forward while fully wrapping her arms around his waist. Flap. A hand shot out from inside of Eugene's cloak and lightly smacked the back of Christina's hand. "Don't cross the line," Mare warned. Christina argued, "Just what line have I crossed? Lady Mare, please don't make some sort of strange misunderstanding. I was just doing something like this because I don't want to fall off the Pegasus." Mare stuck her head out of the cloak to silently glance at Christina. Knowing that any further excuse was futile, Christina slightly averted her gaze and loosed her hand's grip on Eugene's waist. "Get that look off your face." Christina's lips suddenly began to move by themselves. "Because if you don't, I might just smack it off." As her lips said these words, Christina didn't feel any need to try too hard to stop them. Instead, her jaw dropped open. Then, while pursing her lips, Mare stubbornly looked into Christina's eyes before she ended up being pulled into Eugene's arms. "Certainly, Eugene." Mare stammered. I know, but it's still difficult for me to say anything in this sort of situation," Eugene muttered. "Sir Eugene." Mare protested once more. Try not to be too mean to this kid," Eugene meekly requested. "If that young familiar makes sure to consider my feelings, then I'll do the same to her," Anise said with Christina's mouth. In the end, Mare couldn't muster up any more interference for Christina. Thanks to that, Christina was able to hold on to Eugene's waist during the flight, while Mare also spent half the flight embraced in Eugene's arms. Eugene let out a long sigh as he was sandwiched between the two women. He missed the peaceful times back at the Lionheart Mansion. The capital of Eurus was Eurasia. At the heart of that huge capital city lay a magnificent and beautiful palace. This was the Vatican. In the sky above the palace, a four-winged Pegasus was circling with its wings outspread. This was the beloved steed of Rafael Martinez, the commander of the Knights of the Blood Cross and a divine horse bestowed by the light, Apollo. The knights guarding the Vatican bowed towards the light that was circling in the sky. Of the hundreds of paladins assigned to the Vatican, only the Crusader and his divine horse, Apollo, had the privilege of descending directly from the skies over the Vatican to the White Palace that stood at its center. "There's quite a lot of them," Eugene observed. "Just how many are there?" "In terms of paladins alone, there are at least 500, Raphael answered. "About 200 of those are from the Knights of the Blood Cross, while the rest of the paladins are from other units. If you count the church soldiers on top of that, they get into the thousands. Eurus is extremely huge and has done all sorts of things, so she also has many enemies." "Well, that's true," Eugene hummed in agreement. "Well, the truth is rather than its enemies." Sir Eugene, you might find this amusing, But the Vatican has so much security mainly because of all the zealots, Raphael admitted. Eugene burst into laughter. Bwahaha. I knew that would amuse you. While the believers who live in Eurasia aren't like that. But occasionally believers who live in the countryside come to the Vatican hoping to somehow meet with the Pope and at least touch the hem of his robes, Raphael said as he lowered his gaze. Currently Eugene was in the saddle in front of Raphael, but he couldn't sit properly and was instead draped over the saddle. This was to create the illusion that he had been brought here after being overpowered by Raphael. Christina was also sitting quietly behind Raphael. According to the setting of their illusion, Christina had innocently been caught up in the rampage of the fallen hero. While she was in the midst of being kidnapped like this, she had been rescued by Raphael. They currently can't see you, Sir Eugene, Raphael informed him. In their eyes, Apollo only looks like a huge source of light. That's part of the reason why Apollo is called a divine horse. Can I have him? Eugene immediately asked, leaving Raphael speechless. The ceiling of the White Palace has opened. The only ones with the privilege of descending down directly from the sky into the White Palace like this are Apollo and I, Raphael said while ignoring the previous question. Eugene accepted the change in subject. Doesn't that mean that they don't have the slightest suspicion that you might betray them, Sir Raphael? Yes. I have served as a loyal knight and follower of the light for decades. If they thought I would betray them, would they really have sent me to meet with you, Sir Eugene? Raphael asked with a chuckle as he pulled on Apollo's reins. Though that doesn't really bring me much happiness. They don't have the slightest clue that what they are doing is committing blasphemy. They are convinced that they are undeniably in the right and merely fulfilling the will of the light. They can't be said to be completely wrong, as the benevolent light has continued to bless them with its brilliant illumination. The circular ceiling of the White Palace had opened, revealing the entrance to a passageway that led straight down. Apollo furled his four wings and slowly descended down the passageway. From now on, Eugene had to start playing dead. He stopped talking to Raphael and restrained his breath and all traces of his presence. Christina also adjusted her expression, bringing back the familiar mask and covering her face with it. Eugene didn't completely trust Raphael. Although he had agreed to accompany Raphael all the way here, Eugene still considered the possibility that everything Raphael had said might be a lie and that this could all be an act. During their planned surprise in the audience chamber, Raphael's sword might be aimed at Eugene's neck instead of the cardinals or the Pope. So Eugene still kept his right hand hidden within his cloak. But instead of holding the holy sword, his hand was resting on the moonlight sword. No matter what the situation might be, Eugene was convinced that he would be able to break through it by releasing the rays of the moonlight sword. Eugene trusted Christina and Anise. Raphael might still betray them, but those two definitely wouldn't betray him. It's a good feeling, Eugene smiled as he felt something ticklish inside his chest. This sensation was partly the tension of not knowing how things would turn out but also the knowledge that he now had comrades who would absolutely never betray him. After being reincarnated, it was hard to once again get accustomed to his comrades' familiar presence, which he had once taken for granted on those battlefields 300 years ago. Especially since they were in a predicament like this one. They reached the basement of the White Palace, the place known as the audience chamber. This wasn't part of the Pope's quarters. This was a place where believers were said to be able to hold an audience with the light that resided in the heavens up above. This was where the light would bestow a revelation and choose the new Pope from among the stigmatized bishops. Under the original circumstances, Christina would receive the recognition of some other holy relics that had been stored here, and she would have completely transitioned from a saint candidate into a saint. After all that was done, Eugene and the Holy Sword would have received the confirmation of being the new hero in front of the Pope and his cardinals. But in the end, all these ceremonies were just meant to force the hero who had already been chosen by the light, to prove himself once more to the Pope and the cardinals. Christina Rogerus. Anise spoke to her from inside Christina's anxious mind. You are not someone who needs to receive their recognition. Christina got down from Apollo and stood on her feet. Instead, they are the ones who will need to prove their faith to you. Raphael was carrying the limp Eugene in both hands. Like that, he strode over to the door of the audience chamber. There was no need for him to knock. The doors to the audience chamber opened by themselves. The following room looked just like a courthouse. A long white table stood at the raised head of the room, and 3 middle-aged men were sitting behind it. The seat where Sergio Rodriguez should have sat was vacant. Beside his empty seat were two other cardinals in clerical robes with red cloths draped over their shoulders. A middle-aged man wearing a three-layered crown on his head, along with a platinum ring and a staff in one hand, sat in the center between them. This was Aerius, the Pope who had led the Church of Light for the past few decades. "You've done a good job, Lord Raphael," Aerius said. He looked down at Raphael standing below them and Eugene who had lost consciousness. Aerius requested, "I would like to hear what you saw there and also what you did." "Of course, allow me to inform you of what happened without a single omission, Your Excellency," Raphael said as he bowed his head. "But before that, please instruct me on what needs to be done with this fallen one. Bring him closer. Even though he has fallen, he is still someone with a certain status, and since he was the hero chosen by the light," Aerius said as he raised his staff. The platinum ring that the Pope wore on his index finger began to emit a soft light. Then, as if resonating with the staff, the light spread and began to emanate from both items. Raphael didn't raise his bowed head but instead raised both arms that were carrying Eugene into the air. But Raphael didn't attempt to say something secretly. Instead, he lightly tapped on Eugene's waist with his fingertips. Then he slowly began walking up to the raised dais at the head of the room. As Raphael approached closer, Aerius rose from his chair. The other cardinals didn't rise from their seats. Their eyes were on Christina, not Eugene. One could see their eyes were full of questions. But in those eyes, the only things that could be seen were a concern for the progress of the ritual and whether Christina had been completely transformed into the saint. There was no mourning for the deceased Sergio. As the distance between them grew closer, Aerius slowly held out his staff. Raphael lifted Eugene even higher as if he was offering him up as a sacrifice. Raphael's fingertips tapped on Eugene's waist once more. This time the strength of the tap was stronger than before. The moment he felt those fingertips on his back, Eugene's body floated upwards slightly. Crackle. Moving like a bolt of lightning, Eugene bounced off his back and shot up into the air. Frightened by this, Aerius thrust his staff forward. Whoosh. A burst of light engulfed Eugene's body, but the moonlight sword that Eugene pulled out of his cloak cut that light in two. Having opened up a path forward with that, his left hand drew out the holy sword. While drawing the sword, Eugene unleashed a sharp slash. Aerius's right arm, which had been holding the staff, was sliced off and sent flying into the air. "Hag!" A shocked gasp was heard from the cardinals. The cardinals, who had been about to respond quickly to this change, found themselves unable to move from their seats. This was because Raphael's great sword, which had rushed over in an instant, had stopped right in front of their necks. Raphael had drawn his greatsword so close to their necks that there were slight cuts on their throats. Even though his arm had just been amputated at the elbow, Aerius didn't let out a scream. Instead, he just glared at Eugene with cold eyes and demanded, "Just what are you planning to do?" The holy sword and the moonlight sword were held crossed over each other. The two swords were squeezing Aerius' neck from both sides like a pair of scissors. Eugene called out, "Christina." At this call, Christina nodded her head and stepped forward. Whoosh. 8 wings emitting rays of light covered everything in the audience chamber with their light.